Welcome back, Sebastian here. So obviously at the Monaco Grand Prix this past weekend, Max Verstappen's pole streak was finally broken by Charles Leclerc. That pole streak, 8 races, tied the all-time record set by the one and only Ayrton Senna between 1988 and 1989. So basically joint record of 8 consecutive pole positions. Very impressive by Max Verstappen. But I thought I would compare the two streaks, both 8 races, obviously many years apart, which makes it a bit challenging, but still thought it would be a fun exercise to go through. So for Verstappen, his streak started the 2023 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, the last race of the 2023 season, and of course I'm comparing their gap to their teammate, and their gap to the next best driver, so the next driver who was not their teammate, just to compare to see. And you can get some interesting results from this. So at Abu Dhabi, the gap to Perez about 7 tenths of a second. Next best driver was Charles Leclerc, who he lined up alongside on that front row, just over 1/10 of a second, 0.139 seconds. Then first race of the season, Bahrain, again gap to Perez 0.358 seconds, and Leclerc joins him on the front row. So Leclerc ahead of Perez. The gap to Leclerc 0.223 seconds. Then we get to Saudi Arabia, gap to Perez 0.335 seconds, gap to Leclerc 0.319 seconds. Then we get to Australia, gap to Perez 0.359 seconds, gap to Sainz 0.27 seconds. So for these first 4 races of the streak, it was basically Verstappen being joined on the front row by Ferrari. Then we get to the 4 races 5 and 6, and these ones are a little bit different. In Japan, the 5th race of the season, gap to Perez is 0.066 seconds, and Perez joins him on the front row, one of only 2 front rows, and that's actually the closest margin, closest anyone actually comes to breaking Verstappen's pole streak during this 8-race run. Norris was the best non-Red Bull driver, 0.293 seconds behind. Then we get to China, again another Red Bull 1-2 in qualifying. Gap to Perez 0.322 seconds. Next best driver was actually Alonso in the Aston Martin, 0.488 seconds, and that is the biggest gap to the next best team of any of these 8 races. Then we get to Miami, gap to Perez 0.219 seconds, gap to Leclerc 0.141 seconds. So again, Perez not on the front row. Then we get to Imola, gap to Perez 0.53 seconds, gap to Piastri, who lined up on the front, or would have lined up on the front row alongside him, but if he did not have a grid penalty, and that gap to Piastri was 0.074 seconds. So of these 8 races for the Verstappen side, on average the gap to his teammate Perez was 0.364 seconds. On average, the gap to the next best driver, who's not his teammate, was 0.243 seconds. So more often than not, Verstappen's closest challenger for pole position was someone who was not his teammate. So in the first 4 races, there was a Ferrari, then it was a McLaren, then an Aston, and then a Ferrari again, and then another McLaren. So quite a few different teams in that mix there. Now, comparing this to Ayrton Senna's streak, and when you look at these numbers, just the gaps themselves are absolutely mind-boggling when you think about them in a modern F1 from a modern F1 perspective. Now, the streak for Senna started at the 1988 Spanish Grand Prix. His teammate through this entire run was Alain Prost, and of course for the 1988 races, this was the MP44, arguably the most dominant F1 car of all time in qualifying. In the races, it did have the highest percentage win streak, percentage wins in a season. Not win streak, percentage wins in a season until last year's Red Bull beat it. So very fast car. But anyway, Alain Prost also an exceptional driver as well. So Spanish Grand Prix, gap to Prost 0.067 seconds. Next, the next best driver was Nigel Mansell driving in the Williams, 0.202 seconds. Honestly, that seems pretty normal. Then we get to the Japanese Grand Prix. This was again another McLaren 1-2, gap to Alain Prost, 0.324 seconds. Gap to the next best driver, who was Gerhard Berger, 1.5 seconds, an absolutely massive margin. Honestly, in modern F1, it's very difficult for us to comprehend these kinds of margins, because sometimes in like F1 today, the gap of the entire grid will be 1.5 seconds. Anyway, moving on to the final race of that 1988 season to Australia. The gap between Senna and Prost was 0.132 seconds. And then the gap to Nigel Mansell, again driving for Williams, 1.76 seconds. Absolutely massive margin. Then we get to 1989, first race of the season, Brazil. Gap to Alain Prost was 1.318 seconds. And Riccardo Patrese was the next best non-McLaren driver, 0.87 seconds, I believe, driving for Williams that year. Then we get to round 2, but race 5 of the streak. In Imola, gap to Alain Prost, 0.225 seconds. Gap to Nigel Mansell, 1.642 seconds. Very, very large. But Mansell this time driving for Ferrari. Then we get to Monaco, again another McLaren 1-2. Gap to Alain Prost, 1.148 seconds. Massive margin. Yeah, Senna truly was arguably the best driver ever at Monaco. Then when Terry Boutsen, next best non-McLaren driver, 2.024 seconds, so a really big gap there. Race 7 of the streak. Then we get to Mexico, gap to Prost, 0.897 seconds. Gap to the next best driver, who is Nigel Mansell, 1.261 seconds. Final race of that streak, 1.409 seconds was the gap to Prost, and gap to the next best driver was actually Nannini, 1.691 seconds. So when you count all of those together, the averages were for Prost 0.69 seconds, for the next best team 1.369 seconds. So, just taking these numbers at face value, it would be easy to say, oh well, Verstappen actually had more competition. These gaps between himself and Perez, himself and the next best team, are closer than the ones that Senna had. But the reality is, in F1 back in the day, those kinds of gaps were kind of the standard. The gaps in F1 between teammates were much larger than they are now, and that's just the way it works. It was. I can't give you a very good technical reason why, but that's just simply the reality if you're going back and look at the historical records. Now, I think in my personal opinion, I do think that in qualifying at least, Verstappen definitely had more of a challenge from other teams. You can definitely see that the gap to the next best team, 1.369 seconds, absolutely massive. So Senna definitely had more competition from his teammate Alain Prost. From the 8 races, 7 of the 8 were front row lockouts. For Verstappen, only 2 of the 8. So yeah, definitely more competition with other teams for Verstappen compared to Senna, where his primary competition was Alain Prost. And of course, when you look at the teammates, I would say definitely Alain Prost is a much more challenging teammate to go up against in qualifying than Sergio Perez. No offense to him, but Alain Prost is a 4-time world champion. So I think when on the whole, very, very difficult to compare these two. I would say, for teammate, I would give the edge to Senna for sure. In terms of challenge from other cars, I would give that edge to Verstappen. So it's overall, it's kind of a bit of a wash in my opinion. But that being said, both are extremely impressive, and I doubt that we'll see a streak like this again for quite a long time. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. There's my comparison of Verstappen's record equaling 8 consecutive pole streak, comparing with, of course, Ayrton Senna's. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.